Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Today, I'd like to share with you another of these Jataka Tales, the stories told of the former lives of the Buddha, very often when the Buddha appeared as an animal. He wasn't yet Buddha, he's what we call a bodhisattva, someone who will become a Buddha in the future, somebody well on their way to becoming a Buddha. So this is the bodhisattva, and in this story he appears as a very exceptional, wonderful horse. Yes, a horse. This story takes place many thousands of years ago, long, long before the Buddha. It happens in a city called Benares. It's the city these days we call Varanasi, in the central plains of India. It's a very famous city. There they say it's the oldest city in the whole world. Well, who knows? Maybe it is. Whether it is the oldest or not, well, remains to be seen, as they say. But it certainly is a very, very ancient city. And at one point, the king of that city was a good king, and his name was Brahmadatta. It means given by the god Brahma. And that king had many good ministers, many wonderful things, but one treasure he had in particular was a horse. And this horse was called the Knowing One. It goes without saying that he was a very handsome, beautiful, muscular horse, but not just that. He had this amazing quality of knowing exactly where the rider wanted to go before the rider did anything. He knew whether the rider wanted to go fast or slow, to trot, to canter, to gallop. The rider just needed to sit there, and the horse knew just what was needed. And this was the king's very special horse. And not only that, he could, I suppose, what we'd say these days is he could talk. Yes, I know, it's not normal. Horses don't talk. They neigh, they make a few sounds, but this horse, well, sort of could talk. He could communicate. You see, he knew what was in the mind of the person he was with, and he was able to make his own mind known to that person. We call this telepathy or thought communication. But in the end, it works out pretty much like speaking. It's just he didn't necessarily need to move his horsey lips and show his big horsey teeth and try and make human sounds. So, that's quite an exceptional horse, and this was the king's horse. At one point, things looked very bad for the kingdom. You see, the problem is, when a city and a kingdom is very rich, when it has many crops and harvests, because Benares is situated near all of the fields, the plains of Magadha and the other cities and areas that produced very wonderful harvests. And also it was on the Ganges, where the boats could come back and forth from the ocean with their treasures and carrying the grain to be sold. So it was a prosperous city, a rich city, and richness makes other people sometimes jealous. There were 7 kingdoms around Benares, and the 7 kings got together and they decided to attack King Brahmadatta and the city of Benares, to take it over. So it would be theirs. 7 kings with 7 armies. And they gathered their armies together and they marched towards Benares. They each had armies made of 4 sorts of fighters. The most impressive were the elephant cavalry, huge, powerful elephants trained for war, with their riders on the top. Next to them were the horse cavalry, with their knights, such brilliant riders on very impressive horses. And then beside the knights on the horseback, they also had charioteers, chariots drawn by horses, chariots with blades on the wheels that would come like a lawnmower through the soldiers. And then last, the foot soldiers, thousands of them, with their swords, with their lances. 7 armies, each with these 4 sorts of elephant cavalry, horse cavalry, chariots, and foot soldiers. The king gathered his ministers and discussed with them, what shall we do? They all knew they had to fight. They weren't going to give up. But the ministers, and especially the chief minister, said to the king, Your Majesty, in you, we have such a wonderful king. We mustn't lose you. Please do not go out and lead the army and fight. Instead, what I suggest is we have your most faithful warrior, the best fighter in the whole of this part of the world. Send him to lead your army, and we'll fight. The king called the warrior, and he told him, You must lead my armies. And the warrior said, There are many, many, many soldiers on the other side, so many more than we have. The only chance I think we ever have of winning this battle is if I can ride your horse, knowing one. He's very special. The king agreed, but he said, You must go and ask the horse yourself. And so this brave warrior knight went to the horse, and because the horse knew thoughts and could communicate his own thoughts, then the knight asked if he could ride him into battle to lead all of the other soldiers. And then the horse became very quiet. The whole stable became filled with silence, a powerful silence, as the horse thought. And then he said to the knight, Yes, yes, you can ride me. We must defend our kingdom, of course. But there must be a new way. There must be a wise course of action. And we will need exceptional courage. And as the knight not just heard these 3 things, but felt what the horse meant, because this horse was a bodhisattva, a saintly being inside a horse's body. A new way of doing things. A meaningful approach. And courage. It had great impact. And the horse said, All you need to do is ride me. Leave all the rest to me. Leave it all to me. We can win. We can win. All you need to do is to ride me, and when we come to the right moment, to capture the enemy kings. And so the armies went out onto the field of battle, led by this great warrior on this mighty, beautiful, impressive horse, knowing one. And as soon as Knowing One appeared on the battlefield, somehow everybody's eyes were drawn towards him. And as he reared up on his hind legs, it seemed as though he became 10 times the size and filled the whole of space. And as his hooves came down on the earth, it was as though the earth itself had shook and thunder had roared. And then he charged forward with the warrior on his back. As he approached the elephants of the first king, the elephants were so scared. They'd never seen anything like this. Just the feeling of the force of this stallion charging towards them made them tremble and turn and run away. And then there were the horse cavalry. But all of those horses saw Knowing One as their own king, and they simply bowed down in respect to this exceptional, magnificent horse. There was no way they would ever take their riders to fight him. And the horses drawing the chariots also bowed to Knowing One. And as Knowing One charged forward, his hooves like thunder, sparks flying to left and right from his hooves as they struck the rocks of the ground. Then the soldiers peeled away, and the warrior on the back of Knowing One could very easily capture the first king and take him back to the capital, Benares. And so it was that the warrior and Knowing One came out a second time, and the same thing happened. This time the elephant cavalry, the horse cavalry, the chariots and the foot soldiers all simply gave way. Nobody was killed, nobody was hurt. This was the wise course of action, the wise course of action that Knowing One had intended. This was the new way of doing things. And with this unflinching courage, he went forward, defeated those 4 sections of the second army, and the second king was captured. And like that, the third king was captured, and the 4th king was captured, and the 5th king was captured, and the 6th king was captured. But the 6th king, who was a strong king, had a very good bodyguard. And one of his bodyguards, who'd been hiding behind one of the chariots, suddenly jumped out, took out his broad sword and thrust it deep into the side of Knowing One, giving him a terrible injury. But nevertheless, with the sword still in his side, Knowing One, with his warrior rider and the captured king, made it back to the capital city of Benares. But now, once the rider and the captured king had dismounted, Knowing One, so deeply wounded, with blood pouring from this huge wound in his side, had to kneel down and then lie down on the stable floor, preparing to die. And his warrior rider, seeing what was happening, knew he must find another horse. And there were other horses. These horses, these war horses, came from a place called Sind. Sind is the land we now call Pakistan, Afghanistan, famous for its Arabian war horses. So there were other horses of the same size, of the same strength. But of course none of them had the knowledge and the wisdom and the special abilities. They weren't bodhisattvas, they were just fantastic horses. So he picked the very best, and he was going to get it saddled to mount up and go back into battle. But Knowing One on the stable floor, blood pouring from him, knew it wouldn't work. And he told the warrior, you know, even if you manage to kill 500, 1,000 of the enemy, there are so many more of them, there is no way you will succeed in capturing the 7th king, because that 7th king is the most powerful king of all of them. There is no way, there is only one way. You must take me We each need courage. We each need to follow this new way through to the end. And with the greatest of efforts, as you can imagine, so weak, nearly dying, but nevertheless with great effort, knowing one, raised himself back up till he was standing. And the brave warrior felt the sense of victory and knew that is what he had to do, even though this horse was so badly damaged. And they rode out, and again, knowing one, looked like 10 times, 100 times the size of a normal horse. His presence filled the whole battlefield. The elephant cavalry, the horse cavalry, the chariots, all just melted away in front of him, and the foot soldiers, and the warrior was able to capture the 7th king without anybody being killed, sheerly by being so impressive. The warrior and the captured 7th king made it back to Benares on the back of knowing one. They dismounted, and knowing one now collapsed on the floor of the stable. The king came rushing to see him. It was like his best friend, and he'd known this horse, knowing one, ever since he'd been the tiniest of colts. The king's heart was broken. Tears poured from his eyes, and he took knowing one's head in his arms, and he said, "What can I do? What can I do for you, my friend who has saved me, who has saved this kingdom?" And knowing one looked at him with loving eyes and great fondness and said, "There is something you can do and that you must do. Those 7 kings you captured, don't punish them. Don't kill them. If you kill them, then their sons, their cousins will hate you. They'll want revenge, and in the future they'll come back. Your kingdom will never be safe. Instead, talk with them, pardon them, make peace treaties, discuss how you can all work together to share the wealths of these lands. Then our new way, our courageous way, will have worked." With this, knowing one passed peacefully into death. According to the knowing one's wish, the king indeed did talk with the 7 other kings. He pardoned them, and peace was established between the kingdoms, a lasting peace. Everyone talked about the new way of doing things, not the old way of fighting and conflict, but the new way of peace and working together to everybody's benefit. Well, that's the story. That's the story of the bodhisattva appearing in Benares so many thousands of years ago as the wonderful horse of King Brahmadatta. As with all these Jataka stories, now we need to ask ourselves, what can I learn from this story? It's a story. Just a story. But our life now is very real. Is there something we can learn from this story that we can use today, tomorrow, next year, that will make our life better? And the lives of those we know, we talk with, we live with. Well, there are many things we can learn from this story. The main point is that very often there is another way of doing things. A way which is more virtuous, more truthful, more peaceful. It's not always the first thing that comes to mind when there is difficulty, conflict between people. Very often we react. Somebody says something nasty, you want to say something nasty back to them. Somebody hurts you, takes away your property, you want to hurt them, you want to see them punished. sometimes there's a better way. Sometimes we need to think to work out what is the better way. We need wisdom. We need to approach the situation with loving care for the other person, not hatred, not resent, not a wish for them to hurt, but a wish for everyone to come out of this better. Very often, if we do that and give ourselves the time to think of some other way of doing it, we find it. We find it, as knowing one found it. Because you see, there were thousands, tens of thousands of soldiers. It may have been a horrible, bloody battle, with so many hundreds, thousands of people killed or wounded, so many families who lost their loved ones. Instead, not one person was hurt. The only person who suffered and who died was knowing one. But in fact, the whole reason he'd been born as that horse was to save all of those lives. That's what bodhisattvas do. They appear in this world to show us how to help each other. So nobody was hurt. Nobody was hurt. This is the new way. But it takes courage. Sometimes when we promise ourselves, I'm not going to hurt other people, I'm going to find wise, loving, compassionate, peaceful ways of solving problems, we need the courage to stick with that. Because so often the easiest thing, because we're angry, because we're upset, is just to lash out, is just to say something back, to hurt somebody else, to do the first thing we feel like doing, rather than working out what is the wise thing to do. The new way, the virtuous way, the courageous way. In this story we see so much about living in order to benefit others. That's what knowing one did. His whole life was one of wise, loving, caring service. There's a lot more we can get out of this story if we take the psychological aspect. We think, what does the kingdom represent? The king, the ministers, what is the horse? What are these 7 main sorts of things which threaten the kingdom of our goodness? What are the 4 sorts of cavalry and so on? There are many things we can read into this story if we know quite a lot about the Buddha's teachings. But that's not for today. In fact, it's not for me to tell you, it's for you to think about. For today, well, I've finished. It's lovely always speaking with you. I hope to share many more of these Jataka stories. Today was the tale of knowing one, the wise horse of King Brahmadatta. Please go well, go in peace, go in wisdom. Thank you.